Welcome to another episode of Mistrial, where I have this guest that I've had before. Everyone knows and loves Steve Vladeck, who has somewhat made the news this week in kind of a roundabout way. Steve, who's a law professor extraordinaire at Georgetown and a Supreme Court advocate and somebody who appears before the Supreme Court and argues. He's this famous appellate lawyer. So Steve, welcome to Mistrial. So happy to have you back on, especially when you're being talked about in the news. It's really interesting. At first, I wasn't sure it was you, but let's just kind of set the table for everybody. There was a Federalist Society convention. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Federalist Society is, it's this conservative think tank, if you will, and they have presence on law schools, campuses, and they are, whenever you see someone's resume and they were a member of the Federalist Society, it's sort of code for I'm a very conservative Republican. So certain judges will pick their clerks from the Federalist Society because they know that they were conservative. And so, Steve, you went to one of these conventions and you agreed to be on a panel or speak there. I don't know. Tell us what this was and what happened. It sounds like there were a lot of fireworks because Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell then wrote this bizarrely worded statement that he put out. He didn't name you. He called you you'll a field marshal liberal. You'll tell us the whole thing in a minute, but what happened that caused Mitch McConnell to react in such a strong way, and what exactly was this? You got to talk to us about it.
Sure. I mean, so, the Federal Society really started as a series of sort of law school facing individual chapters, loosely organized around this national body, where the idea was to create basically a home for what was then sort of conventional conservative legal thought in the legal academy. And it really, got off the ground in the late 70s, early 1980s, really picked up steam, in the 1990s and 2000s. So, Karen, every law school, or at least almost every law school, has a chapter, and the chapters put on events and they bring in speakers, and that's fine. This was the National Lawyers Convention, which is the big annual fancy shindig that the Federal Society hosts every November in DC. Justices go to the convention, justices speak at the convention. And one of the panels was a panel about the sort of the continued fate and the continued debate over judicial independence. So I've been invited to speak on the panel. I mean, one of the things, I think, to its credit, that the Federal Society tries to do is it doesn't just trot out the conservative or right-leaning position on things. It tries to get, folks like me to come and debate, to come and participate, to come and talk, at the very least to expose its audience to, the other side, such as it is. And so I've done these events in the past. I think there has increasingly been a debate about whether, people like me should not be participating in these events. My view has been, better to present the strongest version of our arguments than to cede the field. But then Thursday happened.
Explain what judicial independence, what is the debate around judicial independence when I thought the judiciary was independent?
It is. And it should be. I think the debate is over what that means in 2024. And so, we've seen a growing chorus, especially on the right, of folks who have equated proposals for court reform generally and for Supreme Court reform specifically as an assault on judicial independence, and basically sort of putting, launching and sort of grounding judicial independence as the reason why we should be opposed to conversations about court reform. And, Karen, part of why I wanted to participate in the event is because I think that has things entirely backwards. I actually think judicial independence depends upon the sort of public faith in the court. Like the independence of the courts is not an end unto itself. It's a means to an end. And that means is preserving the checks and balances, which is just as important in the direction of avoiding a tyranny of unelected judges as it is in avoiding tyrannies of the majority. So, I sort of figured that would be the conversation we would have, would be me standing up for the idea that there's nothing necessarily inconsistent about court reform and judicial independence, and the other folks saying, well, you're wrong. That's not the conversation we ended up having, right? So the panel was moderated by Judge Jim Ho, who's a Fifth Circuit judge. And the panelists were Canon Shanmugam, who's a partner at Paul Weiss and a noted Supreme Court advocate, Dan Epps, who's a fellow, sort of left of center law professor at WashU in St. Louis, me, and then Judge Edith Jones from the Fifth Circuit. So, Canon gave his spiel, and then Dan gave his spiel, and I gave my spiel. And then Judge Jones used her time basically to come after me. And in a really remarkably personal series of attacks to claim that I was engaged in unsavory behavior through my documenting and criticism of a particular practice of judge shopping, of litigants steering nationwide cases like the Mifepristone case to small district courts in Texas where they can guarantee which judge will be assigned to hear the case. And Judge Jones basically said,
right, just for people who weren't following that as closely as we were, there's a one district in Texas where there's only one judge sitting. It's Judge Kaczmarek, and he is a Trump appointee. And the plaintiffs there seeking a nationwide injunction on mifepristone, which is the abortion pill, or one of the abortion pills, went to that one place to file their case, knowing it would go just to that judge, knowing that that judge is fiercely anti-abortion, and knowing that he would pretty much guaranteed give a nationwide injunction on mifepristone, which it did happen. And then, of course, he was resoundingly reversed. And that is a practice that is increasingly happen in these these single judge jurisdictions, where you are guaranteed to get one particular judge who happens to be somebody who, there's a lot of judges, by the way, who could be appointed by a Democrat or a Republican, and they just call balls and strikes. They're not these judicial activist judges who will do certain things and not follow the law. They will literally, you don't know if they're going to rule one way or another. And they're certainly not going to only rule one way if they think the law is contrary to their political beliefs. They will still rule the way the law says. Like, that's how most judges actually are. But you've got some of these really these activist judges, and they are, Trump was really smart to fill vacancies. It's one of the unfortunate things that President Obama did, was he left open these judicial vacancies. And that's something I want to talk to you about. I'm sorry I cut you off, but something I feel very passionate about, Steve, that there's 45 open federal judgeships right now. I don't understand how we got here again, because that's the first thing you got to do is shore up the judges and put independent people, not partisans who are going to vote your way, but people who are going to uphold the rule of law, because that's more important than any one single political belief. Is we have to uphold the rule of law. Anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So that's what you were talking about when you said the Judge Kaczmarek thing in Texas, this judge shop and this look for the one judge that you're going to get, and you're going to get a result because of it. So keep going.
And it's not just the mifepristone case. I mean, that's the one that I think we all have the most familiarity with. But there actually have been somewhere between 50 and 100 of these cases filed in Amarillo, in Victoria, in Waco, in other sort of random divisions in Texas where you're guaranteed a particular judge. Anyway, so Karen, I've been documenting this behavior. I've been critical of the parties engaging in it. I've been calling for reform. And Judge Jones used this as an opportunity to basically attack me for trying to delegitimize the courts through my criticisms, including at one point pulling out like a manila folder that had a bunch of my tweets that apparently one of her clerks had printed out and highlighted, which she was starting to read as if they were evidence of my, in her words, unsavory behavior, unquote. I mean, the irony is that the tweets were entirely anodyne. But, the real sort of, I think, lowlight, right, was when at one point she accused me of being directly responsible for death threats that she claims had been leveled against Judge Kaczmarek and his family. And, Karen, what was so striking about this was supposed to be a debate about judicial independence. And here you have an independent Article 3 judge using this forum, right, to attack me very personally for claims that, one, had nothing to do with the substance of the debate, and two, turns out weren't even actually accurately described as personal attacks by me, right? And so I guess the problem I had with it was less Judge Jones's behavior, and more the fact that like no one in the room, at least in the moment, pushed back against it, right? So Judge Ho, the nominal moderator, didn't do anything. The audience, right, clapped for Judge Jones. And at one point, when I appealed to the idea that the Federal Society is supposed to be about principled exchange of ideas, actually some people booed, right? And that's, I have thick skin. I grew up between two brilliant sisters. Like I can take Judge Jones. What I find alarming about what happened, and what I wrote about in my newsletter on Monday, is that I really think this is a broader indictment of the state of public discourse when it comes to the courts. Like, it should be entirely legitimate to criticize the courts. It should be entirely what law professors do to point out where, some behavior by courts or by litigants or both is really problematic and should be reformed. And for a judge to so visibly and publicly conflate that with personal attacks in a personal attack of her own, right, really worries me, Karen, because I'm well protected. I am a white male law professor with tenure at a private university in a blue jurisdiction. No one is coming after me. But what about litigants in the Fifth Circuit who have to be worried about Judge Jones? What about law professors who don't have tenure yet, who have to be worried about someone making a call to the tenure committee? What about professors at public universities, right? I mean, I was recently at the University of Texas, who might have to worry about the legislature coming after them. This should be a time when judges are encouraging principled debate and discourse about the future of our judiciary, not, making these really, I think, unfounded and ill-conceived personal attacks on folks like me who are trying to have that conversation.
Well, what's fascinating about the MAGA right is they love to do the mean tweet thing and name calling and say things, but they have the thinnest skin I've ever seen, right? They can't handle it. It's shocking. I just want to read what Mitch McConnell decided to put out a long statement about this exchange for people.
It was actually, Karen, it was a speech. He gave this on the floor of the Senate.
He gave this on the floor of the Senate. Holy cow. I mean, but then he put it out as a press release. It's just absolutely shocking to me that this was just supposed to be this, nice little, you agreed to be on a panel discussion. And this is something that Mitch McConnell says liberals undermining the judiciary get a taste of their own medicine. And he says, I've spoken before about the ongoing campaign to undermine the federal judiciary. Left-wing activists and elected colleagues alike continue to make their disapproval of constitutionalist orthodoxy known at all levels, and federal judges who are worried about where things are headed are in a bind. They can't retaliate using their office because they swore an oath to uphold the law without respect to persons. True, they shouldn't retaliate. You're a judge. They go on social media to defend themselves or put out press statements. That's because the American people rightly expect their judges to focus on deciding cases and interpreting the law, not engaging in crisis communications. Of course, the founders anticipated some of this dynamic by giving federal judges life tenure. They hold office until they give them up, regardless of how loudly law professors might complain. So recent unanswered attacks may not have professional consequences for individual judges, but they do have an alarming effect on the judiciary as a whole. The Article 3 branch lacks Congress's power of the purse, and it can't exercise force like the president. It goes on and on about the legitimacy. And then it says leftist law professors and journalists attack the court seemingly with impunity. Yeah, by the way, that's what the job of journalists and law professors is to call things out when they see them, but that's okay. Anyway, leftist law professors and journalists attack the court seemingly with impunity. They know they can affect the institution while their targets have to sit there and take it. And that's why I'm so vocal about my defense of the federal judiciary. He says, but sometimes, very rarely, the tables turn. Sometimes a judge does not get a chance to respond. But it happened last week. At the latest Federalist Society convention, Judge Edith Jones of the Fifth Circuit was on a panel with one of the field marshals of the academic project to undermine the judiciary. Wow.
I'm gonna put that on my wall. Field Marshal Vladeck.
So you're the field marshal of the academic project to undermine judiciary. Interestingly, he doesn't name you. But he says, any of our colleagues who know Judge Jones won't be surprised to hear that in this academic context, she let the law professor have it when he complained this was unfair and that he just wanted to talk about abstract legal principles of judicial integrity. She pulled out his tweets denigrating conservative judges in Texas. The reaction from liberals in the legal academy, although I repeat myself, was outrage. How dare they, said a judge, give one of their own, the sort of tongue lashing. Well, bullies always cry foul when they're the ones who get punched in the nose. So kudos to Judge Jones. I mean, really? This is what Mitch McConnell is putting out on the Senate floor? It's like, good job, Judge, for bullying somebody. First of all, let's just say there is a power dynamic with judges. They're in charge, they're the ones who he makes it seem like, oh, they have to sit there and take it. Yeah, but guess what? They're in charge. They're the boss. Like, if there's a triangle. Judges is on top, and the rest of us, the lawyers who appear before them, are over here. It's like ridiculous. And so clearly whatever you did or said got under her skin, and she couldn't wait. She was looking forward to attack you because that is what she was prepared to do. As you said, she had a folder full of your tweets to come after you. But you must have really, congratulations to you, Steve. I mean, you really got under their skin. You've got Judge Jones ready to come after you with your tweets. You've got Mitch McConnell, who talked about you on the Senate floor and then put a press release out about you. I mean, what you're doing really gets under their skin, and good for you. I hope you keep it up. I hope you keep calling out the behavior. It's not okay. I mean, imagine if, somebody judge shopped in the other direction. It's just insane. And it's just shouldn't be done. It's not ever, like, as a prosecutor, which I was for many years, when we would bring a search warrant, for example, to a particular judge, we would get in trouble for it if it looked like we were we were judge shopping. You're not allowed to do it. You're just not allowed to do it. It's supposed to be random. Justice is supposed to be blind. And so, the conservatives really forget that. So it's great that you are doing this important work and that you keep doing it. But wow, I can't believe they did this to you. I want to talk to you about these judicial vacancies, the 45 that are open, and how likely is it that President Biden is going to be able to get these through. I mean, like I said, I couldn't believe, I was shocked that there's any open. I mean, how irresponsible. They should have learned the first time, right? In 2017, when the first thing Trump did was appoint all these justices. And, unfortunately, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think, miscalculated. And, that left open the ability for Trump to put, Amy Coney Barrett through right before he left office, and just shoved that through very quickly. What are the chances of Biden getting these 45 spots filled? I saw he nominated some, if not all. How people are talking about something called a blue card. Can you explain the process and how likely it is, and what a blue card is, and whether this is going to be done? Because one of the things I'm learning is one of the principal tenets of autocracy is, the first thing they do is they fill all the judgeships with people who are like-minded, because then when they do things and it gets complained about and it gets litigated, when a judge then agrees with it gives the imprimatur of legitimacy. And so it's very smart, and it's a very insidious thing to do if you are, I'm not saying, I don't give Trump credit for this, but it's this far extreme right wing advisors, the Project 2025 people, et cetera. They know that that's so important, and so they know how important it is to have have the judiciary branch to give the legitimacy to them. So how do we prevent that, at least with these 45 spots that are open in the country?
So, I mean, there's a lot going on here, and I think I'll try to keep this brief. I mean, the first thing is, we're seeing. I mean, as we're recording this on Tuesday, right? On Monday, the Senate moved a whole bunch of the pending judicial nominations, and so we're seeing some progress in the Senate. Part of what happened and part of what is happening does have to do with what you say with blue slips. So blue slips are an old Senate tradition, which basically under which a nomination will not be considered if it's specific to a particular state until both of the senators from that state have returned these blue slips. Basically, that home state senators historically have had a veto over nominations that are specific to their state. This practice finally stopped with regard to circuit judges, federal appeals judges, about 10 years ago. And so, blue slips for judges are only still a thing for district judges, for the lowest level of federal judge. But there are a bunch of blue slips that haven't been returned for some of these, district court nominees that are pending. And then there are also, Karen, some contexts in which senators have said, we won't return blue slips for your district court nominees unless you don't fill this circuit court vacancy. So it's the blue slips that are continuing to cause some of this trouble. I will say, I think the Biden administration will succeed in filling most of these vacancies between now and January. I mean, I think the Senate broke a bit of the log jam yesterday. But, there are going to be a whole bunch of other judges who retire or take senior status come January or February. And so, once again, Trump is going to have a really significant opportunity to continue to reshape the federal judiciary. And whereas I think his first term was characterized by a mix of judicial appointees, some of whom I think are really at the extreme edge of the ideological spectrum, some of whom I think are just, decent Republican judges, I suspect the second term is going to have more of the former. And that by the time, President Trump's second term is over, he's going to be responsible for a large chunk of judges throughout the federal judiciary, not just on the Supreme Court. And I think we're going to see the consequences of that, as you say, in a lot of the decisions, in a lot of the sort of movement we see in different bodies of law, between now and 2029. And it's part of why, I'm constantly amazed that we spend as little time as we do in election season talking about judicial appointments and talking about not just Supreme Court appointments, but how significant lower court appointments are. This is the same pattern we're going to see again, repeating in the second Trump administration.
So I have a question. And then we're going to end because this is fascinating. I could talk to you all day. Why is Mitch McConnell calling you a field marshal of the academic project to undermine judiciary? What does that signify to you, this terminology?
It's such a strange phrasing. Like, whatever, call me the major domo. I don't know if it's just me and if I'm especially paranoid because of the times we live in and what it's like to be, a prominent Jewish academic in this time. When I hear field marshal, I think Germany. Field marshal is not a rank that we have in the U.S. military. It is a rank, I think, right, in the British military, but I don't know that Mitch McConnell is super on top of the British military rank structure. I don't know that was intended, but just the visual to me of field marshals are like the field marshals during the Nazi era. And, even if that wasn't intended, it just makes this all that much more awkward. And, as you said, I'm doing fine. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about people who are in less of a stable place and a protected place, right, from which to launch these kinds of criticisms, having those labels hurled at them. And
this is why you're such a nice person. This is why you're such a nice person, Steve. The fact that you are saying, well, he probably didn't intend it. You're giving him the benefit of the doubt. You're a very nice person, and that's why you are so respected in your field. Is you're not one to make assumptions when they don't exist. You don't, you don't attribute things to people unless you have the information, and that's why you are one of the voices that needs to keep speaking up. I look forward to having you on the show and talking to you about literally everything. And thank you so much for being here today. It's really, really great to see you.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.